Hi everybody, welcome to our lesson, first one for this week, financial problems. So our objectives and standards to explain how the financial collapse in the United States impact other countries and analyze steps taken by governments to help their nations recover. And please take a look at the standards too. Our desired result, what financial problems did the world face? All right, two vocab words. We have coalition government, which is a temporary alliance of several parties, and the New Deal, which was a program of government reforms in the United States established to help the country and people recover from financial hardships. Okay, so after the First World War, new countries were established. The problem with many of these new countries, and old ones as well, was ruling, being in control of these countries. Many countries in Europe had never had a democratic system. They were used to a king or a queen or some type of other governmental power being in charge. So many of these countries didn't know what to do with a democratic government necessarily. And even those that did have a system similar to, democracy like we have here in the United States, found it difficult to use because there were so many political parties in these other countries that, everybody just kind of, there was just too many political parties to get along with. So one of the things that happens in Europe is when no political party would win a majority in these new countries, a coalition government would be created. Remember, again, that's a temporary alliance of several political parties, basically. Now, again, these types of governments rarely agreed on anything, and many of them did not last because, again, they just couldn't agree on anything, they couldn't work together. So due to these weak political systems and governments, people began to look to other forms and leaders to rule their country. And we'll talk about that in the next lesson tomorrow a little bit, about the rise of dictators and things like that. But just remember that this definitely kind of plays a role into where we're going. So in 1919, the Weimar Republic was established as Germany's democratic government. Now, this new government faced trouble from the very start. The country lacked a strong democratic tradition. Remember that we just said a lot of European countries were used to having a king or a queen or some other type of government, and Germany was one of these. So when Germany is going to have a democratic type of government now, it just creates problems. There were also many political parties in Germany, and so when the Weimar Republic comes about, many people are going to blame this new government for a lot of their problems, and they're also going to blame the new government for the Treaty of Versailles too. Remember, the Treaty of Versailles kind of definitely ended World War One, and it punished Germany a lot for a lot of the causes of World War One, and many people were not happy with that, so they blame their government for kind of agreeing to this treaty. Germany also had financial problems. During the war, Germany had failed to raise taxes to support the fighting. Instead, the government printed large amounts of money. Now, after their defeat in the war, the money began to lose value. So, to help pay war reparations, which was part of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to pay money back to France, England, places like that, for the damages and lives lost. So, to help pay for war reparations and other economic issues, Germany began to just print more money, and this money really wasn't gaining any value. As the money continued to decrease in value, item prices began to rise. So you have a decrease in money value and a rise in items, and this is what we call a rise in the cost of items, I should say. And this is what we call kind of when we have a sudden rise of increase in prices, it's called inflation. So, for example, the cost of bread in Germany rose from less than the mark, this was Germany's former currency, the mark at the time, in 1918. So less than the mark to 160 marks by 1922. That's a big jump in 4 years. There are many, many pictures. If you Google it or want to look it up later, there's many pictures of people taking wheelbarrows, of money to pay for, bread, milk, eggs, things that should cost very little money, but they had to take so much money with them because the price of things was so extreme. There's also pictures of people wallpapering their home with money because money just didn't have value anymore, and kids were, building towers and using stacks and stacks of money to, make like toys and buildings, because money just didn't have the value. So with that said, many in Germany began to question the power and the authority of their new government. Germany began to recover with the help of an international committee. And this international committee was led by an American banker. His name was Charles Dawes. And he led this committee, and he helped establish the Dawes Plan. What the Dawes Plan did was it provided $200 million in a loan to Germany from American banks. And the plan also set up a better schedule in terms of war reparation payments for Germany. Okay, before that, Germany was kind of forced to make payments every so many, so often and so frequent that it was really hurting the German economy. So, with this Dawes committee and with Charles Dawes, this definitely allows Germany to kind of make payments on a better schedule that works for them. As the German people and government slowly recovered, they also agreed to meet with representatives from the French government. Now, both France and Germany, along with some other countries who were there to witness this, both agreed to never wage war on each other again. Well, we'll see how that plays out. Countries also met in the United States to sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact, in 1928. And what this said was that nations signed to stop the use of war as international policy. So they said, listen, we shouldn't use war as a threat to solve our problems. We should try to talk and negotiate and discuss instead of going to war. Again, we'll see how that works out. The problem with this is with these things is there's no real authority or strength to these agreements, and the League of Nations, which was established, really lacks the power to enforce these policies as well. So even though people are saying they don't want to have war and conflict anymore after World War I, there's no real support behind it to make sure that happens. All right, in the late 1920s, the United States economy supported the world, okay? However, there are going to be problems with the system in the United States. I don't want to get into too much here. Hopefully you'll take U.S. history, or have had U.S. history, and we'll talk more about in depth in U.S. history about the Great Depression. But some of the problems that included in the United States with this are unequal distribution of wealth, overproduction by agriculture and business, and less buying by Americans. So see, these are some of the hidden problems in the U.S. economy at this time. Another big problem with the U.S. economy is the stock market, and some of you probably heard of this. But many people decided to become part of the prosperity of the 1920s. The 1920s were a big time, especially in American culture and history, of spending and buying and all these good things and stuff like that. So everyone kind of wants to get in on the wealth. Everybody wants to make some money. So to do this, people bought stocks, or portion stocks are basically pieces of a company that you can buy and gain income from the company, how well the company does. They begin to buy stocks on margin, which requires putting a small amount of money down and borrowing the rest from a stockbroker. So I could put $10 down and then borrow $100 more from a stockbroker. Okay, now I have to pay that money back, that $100 back. But again, this allowed common people and people who didn't have a lot of money to become involved in the stock market. Now, this system of buying on margin seems to work pretty well, and it will continue to work as long as stock prices continue to increase. However, if stocks start to decrease, investors would have no way to pay off their loans, and that's what we're going to see happen. So in September 1929, investors began to worry that the stock prices were becoming too high. Some began selling their stocks with the hope that prices would drop. By October 24th, 1929, the prices were in a downward spiral. So the stock market is slowly going into this kind of chaotic, downward spiral, okay? As people hear about this, they begin to become very fearful, and it spreads, and people begin to immediately want to sell their stocks, and many of them do. Now, the problem is that since everyone's selling their stocks and no one's buying into the stock market, this creates a problem. So since no one was buying, and on October 29th, 1929, the stock market is going to collapse, and this is going to lead to what will become known as the Great Depression. So what are some of the effects of the Great Depression? Stocks became worthless, so if you had stocks, they weren't really worth any money that you thought you were going to get for them. People lost their jobs, so unemployment rose. Wages and production also dropped by industries. Industries just weren't producing anything or couldn't afford to produce anything, so we see that change. Banks and businesses are going to close. Banks are not even going to stay open, and many banks shut their doors and people couldn't get their money. I've told this to my U.S. history class where on my grandfather's side, he told me when he was alive that his grandparents during the Great Depression, uh, they were actually one of the lucky ones. They were able to get down to the bank and get their money out pretty much right before the bank closed, or most of their money, I believe. But afterwards, they never trusted the banks again. They always kept their money in their house. And after his grandparents passed away, they went to the house and they found money all over the place, under the mattress, in the walls, in the ceiling, things like that. So people became very distrustful of banks. And again, people lost their homes, their farms, and like I said, even their money. So take a look at this kind of map chart here. I know the world looks a little weird how they have it laid out, but read some of the facts here for a couple of minutes. And this shows you, if you look down here, this was the percentage. The purple bars you'll see were the number of employed in 1929 when the stock market collapsed and kind of the beginning of the Great Depression. And then look at the numbers for 1932, which are the red bars. So for example, look, if you look at the United States over here, it was 3.2% in 1929, and then in 1932, everybody, it jumps up to 24.1% of the population was unemployed. You want to look at another country, you can look at Great Britain. Here's England, 7.3% in 1929, and then in 1932, 22.5%. So again, take a minute here, read some of these facts. I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to do that. So the Great Depression did not only affect the United States. American bankers demanded repayment on their loans overseas. Investors withdrew money from Europe, and high tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods, the goods coming into our country from other countries. So high taxes on European goods look to just simply support American businesses. So we're basically telling Europe, no, no, we don't want your things. We want to only support our businesses here. So that definitely hurts European companies as well. It didn't work out as well for Americans either, but it does hurt European businesses too. So what did the world do to kind of respond to this, okay? The British are going to pass high tariffs just like the Americans did, so they pass high taxes on imported goods. They increase taxes and they regulate their money. They also lowered interest rates to help support businesses and industries. France passed a series of reforms to help workers, and other nations established welfare benefits, so help for the people in terms of money, and public work projects to put people back to work. Now, the United States government also came up with programs to help the country and Americans recover. This is going to be called the New Deal. Okay, so again, here's one of your vocabularies, the New Deal. So this was under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And what this simply was public works projects to put people back to work if they needed a job, welfare programs, relief programs, and even reforms for banking and the stock market as well. And these new programs will help the U.S. recover slowly, but they will make an indent on the Great Depression. And then our closure here, what financial problems did the world face? Think about the Great Depression, the stock market crash, how countries were trying to recover from World War I, the struggles they faced, even what struggles governments faced, and that will help you with today's lesson. All right, so have a great rest of your day or night and talk to you soon.